Hey, welcome to the very first episode of Gradtalk MBA by Magoosh. This is where we chat with real admissions officers, MBA students, and alums, getting the full scoop on getting in and getting through business school, among other things. Do you want to get into a top program to succeed? What is business school really like? Hear about all of this and more in Gradtalk MBA. In this episode, I'll be chatting with Pejman Pormazi, co-founder of Magoosh and Haas MBA alum. He's going to take us on a journey along with me, Bhavin, the CEO of Magoosh and also a Haas MBA alum, of how we started Magoosh and our experience taking the GMAT, getting into business school, our experience at Haas, and our experience afterwards as entrepreneurs. Hey everyone, I'm Bhavin, CEO of Magoosh. I'm here with Pejman, co-founder and actually the original founder of Magoosh. Figured it'd be a good opportunity for you to get to know us, for us to share our stories applying to business school, a little bit of how we founded Magoosh and where we are today. But yeah, hey, it's good to see you.
Yeah, I know we talk all the time, but we're often just voice only doing the Slack huddle. So it's good to see you on camera.
Yeah. For those who don't know, Magoosh used to have an office in Berkeley, California, pre-pandemic. But Pejman's been up in Seattle for a long time now and has not been with Magoosh, only rejoined recently. We'll get into that later. But yeah, so him in Seattle, me in Berkeley, still living here. The company's fully remote. Yeah, we don't see each other much.
Yeah, and this
you didn't even want to shave for the podcast.
No, I'm growing this out, and this is gonna be a trip down memory lane. We're going back 15 plus years with a lot of stories. So we'll see how my memory serves me as we go through this.
I know. Well, the gray in your beard shows the age. No, honestly, I shave because I also have gray in my beard. So there you go.
I know I should hide it.
So, I said you're the original founder. This is true. You had the idea for Magoosh before we even got to business school. We went to business school at Haas, but I think it'd be cool for, talk about your experience studying for the GMAT and what prompted this to begin with.
Yeah, this goes all the way back to 2008. Very different era. I think iPhone had just launched. Facebook was kind of all the rage, though I think MySpace was bigger. So this is like way back. And I was a consultant at Deloitte 2 years in there, and got it in my head to go to business school. And so kind of the first step for me was studying for the GMAT. And as I looked at what my options are and what I should do, where I ended up was signing up for Kaplan, and it was an in-person class. I think it cost, I want to say like $1,500. It was like a significant sum of cash, and I remember going into these classes and just finding the class itself just totally ineffective, at least for me. Like it was just sitting in there listening to a lecture, and I was just like, this is not helpful for me. And so after about 3 or 4 classes, I stopped going to those classes, and I was basically using Kaplan for the content that we were given, and they had a few kind of simulated tests that you can do online. And to me, that was the most valuable thing because one, the GMAT itself was online and it was adaptive and you take it that way. And then two, it was just like much faster way to learn by just like doing the question, figuring out what went wrong, and just working through the problem. So very quickly I started feeling like, hey, like, startups were in vogue again. And so it was like, hey, why isn't there just a digital solution to this that's more kind of practice oriented, where you're taking questions? And I was itching to kind of start building something. So on the side, while kind of getting ready and applying to business school, I started building this thing that at the time was called QBank with another coworker of mine, Vikram Shenoy. And we were both applying to business school and basically building this thing on the side.
Yeah, I remember you coming in with you sharing the QBank concept and idea. It's interesting to hear you talk also about the practice test being online. And I'm like, was it online? Because I didn't take a class, but I got a book. I want to say I went into a Borders,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
just dating ourselves. I went into a Borders, and my wife who had taken the GRE had recommended like a Barron's book or something, and I grabbed a Barron's book off the shelf, and I believe that my practice tests were on a DVD.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah. Okay.
so I think, or a
We
CD
were
or
must have
something.
been just the right when things were transitioning, but I had the same thing. I bought many books. And basically, for me, it was like how many practice questions could I take? And so I was buying the books and doing the simulated tests, like anything but like a long lecture. Um, and yeah, like there was a lot of stuff. I also remember coming up across different forums and seeing people discussing questions and what they got right or wrong. And I also thought that was really interesting, because dissecting why you got it wrong and like how you might not make that mistake again, to me was the key. And there was a lot of really good content in this like less structured, more online way than the traditional courses.
Yeah. I think you're also it sounds like, well, from what I know about you and from your experience, far more diligent than I was, doing lots of practice, going online for forums. I just bought the book and I did the questions in the book begrudgingly.
Yeah.
I was also at Deloitte for 5 years, and sort of decided to, go through that sort of practice, or decided to take the GMAT. I don't know, the thought being, yeah, maybe business school is a good idea. But wish I were more diligent, but also was a pretty good test taker. So that did well for myself in that way.
Yeah.
But yeah, my experience was different in that when I took the first official practice test, so when I went to MBA.com, and there's the two free tests they still have that they used to have, and I took one of those, and I thought, wow, this feels very different than the experience I just had, not only doing the questions in the book, but also on that CD or DVD, in terms of how adaptive it is, how hard the questions are, the style of the questions. And so for me, those practice tests, the official ones, were really illuminating, and it really made me feel like, oh, there needs to be a better way to prep, more resources like this. And so that was some of the inspiration of when we did get to Haas, and you were talking about Magoosh and what used to be QBank, that I was interested.
Yeah, that's awesome. How did you ended up doing on the test? Did you get the score you wanted?
Yeah, so I'm very competitive, as you know, and so I took a practice test, the official practice test. I did really well. I got a 750, and I know that's not like, it nothing to be ashamed about, but also like recognize that's hard for folks. And I'm just a good test taker, and so it's just been a thing for me. And then I took the second practice test, and I got a 770. So I went into the testing, I want to get a 770, and then I got a 750. So I was, it was all fine. It's a great score, and your GMAT score is only one part of your application, as I wish I better understood at the time. And really, the difference between those scores is not much.
Definitely. I had a similar story where I think I was getting around 760, 770 in my practices. And so that's what I was gunning for. And then the day of the test, as I was halfway through, I did the math part first, and math I was stronger in. I could tell I just didn't do well. I was like, I don't know what happened here, but I know I've like done my work, like one of my worst performances in the actual test. And then so I like really psyched myself up for the verbal, and I went into the verbal and basically got my highest score ever on verbal. I got a 730 in total, but it was basically because I had bombed the math, but then set a new high for myself in verbal. But it was a roller coaster, and I feel like a lot of people I've talked to had a little dip on the test date as they just go through some new variables and all.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot at play and the anxiety and the stress and like making sure you get a good night's sleep, making sure you eat well, all of those things. And I know we're talking about GMAT, but I was sort of reflecting on SAT for me. So I took the SAT in high school, and I was thought of myself as someone, you know, who was got good at math because I loved math and all of that. And so I wanted to get a perfect math score on the SAT. And it took me three tries to do it. And I don't remember my exact scores, but like the first time, this was on a 1600 scale. So I know the SAT's been through a lot of changes with 1600, 2400, 1600. But I think like one of the first times I got like a 1400, 1410. And then the next time I was like in the low 1300s. And I just like, I didn't test well that day and I wasn't, you know, just feeling it. And then the third time, after like more prep, I got a 1500 and I did get that sort of perfect math score. And it's interesting just thinking about how like, that's a huge fluctuation, right? You know, like from low 1300s to 1500. And, you know, putting it out there for everyone that like, yeah, that fluctuation can happen and it's okay. And we all go through it. And, you know, it's also okay to take the test more than once.
Absolutely. So what schools are what, like, let's walk through the rest of our admissions process.
Yeah. So I was just, I did everything you're not supposed to do. It's like, you know, what you shouldn't, I'm not the person whose journey you should follow. So one, I didn't have a plan for applying to business schools so much. It was more, my mom said, you know, she suggested, hey, you've been doing this consulting thing for a while, maybe you should get an MBA. And I was like, no. She's like, well, at least take the GMAT. And a lot of folks at Deloitte took the GMAT. So I was like, okay, I can do that as a first step. And so that sort of moved me down that path. And I was living in Philadelphia at the time. So I applied to Wharton. I knew it was a good school, but I didn't know anything about the school, but I knew it was in Philadelphia and I wouldn't have to move. And so that's not a good reason to apply to a school, but that's what I did. And then I also applied, I think, to Stanford, and I applied to Haas. And why those schools? I think because I did like technology. I did my undergrad in computer science and also economics. At Deloitte, I was not in management consulting, but I was in technology consulting. So there was the appeal of, you know, California and like the Silicon Valley, and it was not even so much startups for me, but just technology.
Yeah.
But I didn't really like know beyond that why those schools so much, and I didn't really have a plan. I didn't think through like my story, and so I went through the application, submitted everything. Actually was a little bit late, I think, like a few minutes late or something to the Haas one. So luckily I still got in, which again, not recommended. But yeah, I got outright rejected from Stanford. I got an interview at Wharton, which I was not prepared for at all. When they asked me why Wharton, I didn't really have a great answer. Yeah, I know. Just because it's in Philadelphia and I don't have to move. I mean, it's a great school. I just, you know, like I didn't think through it. And it might have been a good school for me, but I didn't think through it. And then with Haas, it was my last one. And so by then I sort of started realizing like, oh, I should understand why the school. I did a lot more research and I realized like, oh, this sounds like the perfect school for me. So it kind of worked out in that way. Yeah. Because while I am competitive, I also like love collaborating and the smaller sort of class size and still, you know, being interested in technology. It all worked. And so, yeah, that was sort of at least my path. I'm curious what it looked like for you.
Yeah, for me, I applied to 5 schools. It was Harvard, Stanford, MIT, Haas, and UCLA. And kind of similar rationale to you. I was definitely all in on tech. So it's kind of like UCLA was my Wharton for you because I was living in Southern California. But I didn't apply to Wharton, for example, because I was like, oh, I'm all tech, like that. That's what I want to do, and it's great for everything. But I thought of it more like a finance oriented school, and so yeah. So I think I applied round 2, and generally I was just very junior. Like I was only 2 years of work experience. So like that was like part of the thing that was I had to work against. But so I ended up getting outright rejected Harvard and Stanford. And then I got waitlisted at MIT and Haas, and then got into UCLA. And so then basically this like long waitlist saga kind of played out for me. I registered for UCLA, so I was like, all right, I guess I'm going to UCLA. That's what I thought. And it basically became this long thing of me trying to do everything I can to demonstrate to these schools that I'm interested. And so I would write, when I went and visited both schools. So I went and flew out and like found a way to like meet students, try to like meet with the admissions directors, like just do what I could to like say hi, because I hadn't even interviewed at these schools or anything. And the other thing I started doing though was writing letters. So I would send in an update. I want to say like every 2 weeks or so, I would send an update of what I was up to. And the letters were actually about Magoosh or QBank. I think it did become Magoosh before I even got to Haas. So at some point I started calling it Magoosh, but I would send mock-ups of what the site looks like and describe kind of what we were doing or any adoption we had from customers and all. And basically just explaining kind of building the startup. So that's really funny. I really want to go hunt down these letters and see what I was even saying. But eventually I got an invite from Haas to interview and went and did that. And then it was like very late. It was June or yeah, it was the summer when they told me I'm in. So it was like very, very late. Like I think I had even put a deposit down or something that I couldn't get back from UCLA. But I'd gone to Berkeley undergrad, and so I always loved Berkeley and really wanted to be in the Bay Area. So there was no doubt when I got it, and I was like, I'm going there.
Yeah, wow, you really knew what you're aiming for. That's also so impressive. I only recently learned that you had not only been waitlisted, but the method you used to try to get off the waitlist. And I don't know much about getting off waitlists, but it's impressive that you were sending in mock-ups and giving the weekly updates and like, it's probably a good tip out there for folks who end up being waitlisted. I was waitlisted at a school I was interested for undergrad, and I didn't do anything. So I think I just left it up to chance. I did not get in. So for what it's worth.
Yeah, well, it's a funny world because then I end up meeting you and Hansu and building Magoosh, not to mention my wife and another co-founder for another startup. So I'm like, wow, like really happy I pushed and got in there because my life would look completely different right now.
Yeah, that's incredible. And before we exit this sort of path of the GMAT and our admission stories, since I'm sharing a lot of things that you should not do that I did, I have one more, which is I also didn't know the value of time management for taking the GMAT. And so I didn't finish either of my essays.
Yeah, like in
the test. I was taking a test and I didn't they weren't complete. They like ended mid like sentence or mid paragraph. Yeah. And so I ended up getting a 3.5 out of 6 on those essays. And it definitely had a moment of, do I not submit this? Do I have to retake this whole test? And it's interesting because now there's an argument over time that those essays are far less important, which I think is true than your actual essays for business schools. I didn't know that sort of fully at the time, but I just gambled and went for it. So I'm full of the things you should not do, and you are full of the things you should do. Have a plan. Work hard to get off the wait list.
in some ways, but I'm curious. Kind of moving into the next phase. I know we met within the first, Haas, first of all, small class. It's, I think, 240 students or so.
When we were there, it was 240. I think it's slightly larger now.
Yeah. So, but either way, we like got to know each other pretty quickly, and I invited you and a couple people to my place. But I'm curious if you told the story, like from your perspective. What was that like? Because that was like me trying to sell Magoosh, pitch Magoosh.
So you, I think we actually worked on a case competition together. I vaguely remember that. And I don't remember how we all ended up working together, the five of us or so. But I remember thinking like, oh, that was a good experience. That was fun. And I recall, and I'm not sure, and I looked back for the emails and I just couldn't find them. But I recall that you had enjoyed working with us enough to say, hey, let me pitch you on Magoosh. Like you all seem, diligent and on top of things. And so for me, I was thinking, I was really suffering from a lot of FOMO, fear of missing out. You're in business school, there's all these opportunities. I'm in the Bay Area for the first time in my life living there. I'd only held one job for 5 years out of college. I finished my undergrad at Duke and I went to Deloitte. I was at Deloitte for 5 years. So I was like, okay, I'm here. I think I want to go into product management on the consumer side after having done a lot of like business side stuff, but I don't know exactly what. And there's an opportunity. I don't want to miss this. This could be the next, big thing. And it sort of checked some of my boxes, and I like the people. So I went in with a bias towards wanting to do it, actually. And so there was that, and then I think I know, you were thinking like, I want to pitch Magoosh, and I was thinking, oh, I hope I don't get like cut from the team. Because it's like, what am I bringing? I mean, I knew that I had, technical ability that probably, I would say for MBA students, maybe more than the average one, by far, given my undergrad degree and sort of background in tech. But at the same time, I didn't know anything about startups. And there's a lot I didn't know. And like you had already sort of built something, and I knew some of the other folks had like been in those spaces. And so, yeah, I had a little bit of fear too.
Oh, that's funny. It's funny to look back on now, because what I showed was like kind of so off in terms of what the product that customers actually wanted. So real quick at a high level, it was people powered test prep was what I demoed to Bhavin and a couple other classmates. And it was the content, anyone could submit it. It was basically like a forum, but it was structured so that you could kind of like actually, answer the multiple choice questions and all. But my sense of why I got you and Hansu interested was, at least back then, it was rare to like, particularly in business school, to be like, I'm building something and here's this thing and it's like actually working and you could go sign up for it on the web. So I think like that, I had that going for me, even if the idea was just really wonky and weird. It was like, hey, like this is real. Like we could start building it right now, or like keep building it right now. And so maybe that's also what made it that you all gave me a chance in that meeting.
Yeah, I mean, I was inspired when I saw that you'd actually built something. And I love the idea that it was sort of this crowdsourced thing where people could upload their own questions, even though in retrospect that made no sense, as we learned, because people don't want to learn the GMAT, nor would we advise anyone to learn the GMAT from their friends and to learn from experts. But at the time, I was like, this is cool. You have a website, you have thought through it, and you've built this out. And again, this is 2008, when it was much harder to build a website than it is today. And so, or a web application. Yeah. And so, yeah, that was inspiring. And then I also remember when we put it out into the wild, and I think we had like a button that was ask a question, and the intent was like ask a GMAT question and get up on the site. And then some customers or, users, no one was paying at the time, but some users were just asking like, just a question, not like a GMAT question, a question. Oh, we have some work to do. I'm curious I have some other stories about the early days. I'm curious what you remember about, you said we were off, and I agree.
Yeah.
About how off we were.
Well, I just remember it took me a while to come around to admitting we were wrong. Cause yeah, like the crowdsource, thing was so in vogue. It was like there was Yelp and Wikipedia and all these apps coming out that were all about crowd wisdom of the crowd and all this sort of stuff. So I was like, oh yeah, this is the thing. But what I remember really got things moving in a new direction. And I want to say it was more you and Hansu that pushed this, was just this recognition that our target customer, like we just happen to have access to hundreds of them just walking around campus, and we're talking to them all day. So rather than just keep building in this kind of vacuum that we had started in, it was like, why don't we just start talking to these our classmates and seeing what they would use and do. And what I recall from that is like we scrapped the app in a sense and went to these like really basic mock-ups, and we would come up with like, okay, maybe it should be this, and then we create the mock-up. And then I remember sitting in those small little rooms that Haas had and having classmates come by, like one by one, we'd book them out. And I want to say we talked to like 50 plus classmates, just iterating on the idea until we got it. But curious what you remember from then.
Yeah, I do remember that. And I don't know whose idea it was, and maybe Hansu, but I remember we scrapped the site, and then we would build mock-ups in PowerPoint, like clickable prototypes. So it's like, oh, you can like hyperlink this slide to this slide. And I mean, now we can do it in Google Slides, or there are actually like mock-up tools that are just as easy. But back then it was like in PowerPoint, creating like these fake websites and sitting down with classmates. And I remember one of the first times one of our classmates, who we sat down with, basically said, I would never use this for my GMAT prep. I was like, oh, that's like some cold, hard truth. And I think, you'd been working on this for a while, and had more attachment to the original idea.
Right.
And, I think we were lured in by the original idea, but we didn't really have attachment. So we were just like, okay, you wouldn't use it. What would you use? Yeah, but I remember we kept like leveling up our mock-up tools from PowerPoint to some other ones that I don't even know exist anymore. We could like make more clickable websites without having to actually build anything. And we would do these sessions where we'd have like sometimes 3 people lined up back to back to back, so we could kind of like get themes. And then I remember one of the times where someone like clicked through everything and said, I would pay for this. And I was jumping for joy. And just like, oh, you would pay for this.
Journey to get to that. I remember like, it took a while to get there.
And the book, it's Don't Make Me Think. I don't know if you remember it. Mm-hmm. Which like walked through how to do these usability tests. I've probably recommended it to hundreds of like early stage founders in terms of, when you're building out your app, because it gave us an entire script of like how to approach these tests in a way where you're not like biasing the person and like really just letting them like explore the site. And so that was huge. And so there's a lot of learning for us along the way.
Totally. And, it's like reflecting back, that's definitely a lot of the power in business school. Kind of in 2 different ways. One was that we just had a great community of classmates, and everyone was just so generous with their time back then that it was really easy to get time and get people to give you real feedback and thoughtful feedback. And there's not that many times in your life where you can get that, like hundreds of people ready to step up and do that with you, like just down the hallway. And then the second thing is like, we just had a lot of time, time, and like didn't have to worry about job at that time or anything like that, being in the full-time program. And so I remember just how we would just make use of all the open time and even leverage like classes to work on Magoosh and make it like the project is Magoosh. And like that, it was just so nice to have that basically 2-year incubation period where we could just go really deep on it and like get all those resources as we developed it.
Yeah, that's something that I remember and have shared with others. It was just, you've already taken, we'd already taken the risk of going to business school. We're not earning a paycheck. Like, now's the time.
Yeah.
We don't have to take that leap in a sense of like quitting a full-time job. We already quit the job and now we're getting a degree.
Yep.
We have access to people. And then the value of a MBA or EDU email address is just incredible. It reminds me of, the hard pivot we made with the business was moving from people-powered test prep or crowdsourced test prep to learning that, okay, people want to learn from experts, people who know the GMAT inside and out, who are good instructors, who can teach. And I think I remember a conversation you and I had, because again, you were not to, to give you a hard time, but you're more attached to the crowdsourced idea. Yeah. And I was like, we need to find experts. And, we did well in the GMAT, but we aren't experts. We're not instructors.
Right.
And so I think you'd said, well, like, can we even find these people? Like, where are these people? And so I took that as a challenge, actually, because I was like, okay, I mean, I believe we can, but you're asking this. I know you're asking it from a place of attachment to the prior idea, but it's still a valid question. And that night, I think using my berkeley.edu email address, I went on Craigslist for GMAT tutors or went on like tutoring sites, started emailing. I probably sent 100 emails to potential like people, be like, would you create GMAT content for us? We are MBA students. We don't yet have a product. I should need to look at this pitch. It's like, we don't have a product, but we're going to build it. And we're looking for someone to create content and participate in the revenue that will eventually come. So no product, no revenue.
No pay.
People, right. But the future upside, right? And people responded. It's like, wow. And, just thinking about, the power of a Berkeley or another MBA email address, and at least getting people to respond. And obviously you still have to like show that they were real, and we were able to do that and find someone and they were able to participate in the success. But it's just something that I kind of forget, to like, oh yeah, when you're in school you have a lot to leverage.
Yeah, you're right that people are generous even outside of the school, because everything's framed as like a student and giving them time. So that is also, I hear you on that. And there's like a little stamp of like, all right, this person has this credential or is going to get this credential. So that always helps as well.
Yeah, the credibility, I think it's like that implicit credibility, which goes a long way. So and there's this question, should it? I don't know, but it does.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, I guess kind of zooming through business school more. I know the summer between first year and second year, I did kind of a shorter internship, and then spent the second half working on Magoosh. You and Hansu went all in on we're just going to do Magoosh the whole time. Maybe talk about that and kind of that experience and also like how you made that call.
Yeah. I'll start by saying I was in a fortunate position, having worked for 5 years and been pretty frugal, that I was able to save and to not worried about the pay for the summer internship, which, is a real obstacle for a lot of folks. And then 2, I had a guaranteed offer to go back to Deloitte. And did you as well?
I also had that. Yeah.
Yeah. So we both went through this program where you apply ahead of time, and then Deloitte will sort of give you a guaranteed offer to come back. I don't know if this program still exists, and they'll even like reimburse you for business school if you do go back over a period of time. And so in that sense, I was thinking, well, I have this offer to go back, so I might as well go all in on the company and see how far sort of I can take it. And then the other thing is I also just suffer from a level of like inertia. When I'm moving in a direction, I just keep moving in that direction. And so the idea of having to interview for internships didn't appeal to me. So I'm just being honest, right? Like that was also some of it. So I was already headed in this direction. I was excited about it. I knew I had a safety net, and interviewing didn't appeal to me. So for me, those are the pieces that led to the decision. And I think there's also an element, you and Vikram being more of the original founders, where I was like, I need to prove myself too, right? Like I need to prove that I am worthy of a founder title by like putting in the work. And it certainly helped that Hansu was doing it. I think if he weren't doing it, it would have been hard because I'm like, what am I doing on my own? I don't even know how to do this because you don't learn how to be a founder. But at least if you have someone to do it with, then we were like able to, show, like, quote unquote, show up to work every day, which means just meeting in your apartment, the apartment that you and Hansu lived in, and saying like, all right, we're getting to work, and like doing whatever the plan was for the day and then moving on. So, yeah.
Well, I'm trying to, I don't even remember what milestones or things were happening in that period, but I definitely remember what it felt like coming to work and doing things in the summers. It was in that summer, it was, beautiful Berkeley days, and we were in this big house with a bunch of classmates, including Hansu, and we had the basement as kind of Magoosh headquarters. And I just recall we had this big whiteboard and kind of tasks and different things on there. And then I also remember we had this challenge that we had for each other, where it was like a push-up challenge, where anytime we said the word test, you had to do 10 push-ups. And obviously as a test prep company, it was like just constant dropping that word. And I think we were even like on call, like talking to an investor, talking to a customer, like didn't matter, like that was the rule. And I just remember like tally marks, like we would keep track of each person and how many times they done it. And that basically was like, each line was like 10 push-ups. And I just remember it was just packed by the end of the summer. So yeah, it was just such a fun time. And then, walking out to lunch, all the different places in Berkeley, just chatting about the company and all. So it was definitely a really fun stage of the company and a business school.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's interesting because working on Magoosh took a lot of time, right? Like between classes and other things. I participated in fewer social events than I think the average MBA student because we were working on Magoosh, but got to build these like really deep and meaningful relationships and like work on some things. I don't regret it at all. And so I viewed it as like a ton of fun. And I do remember doing a lot of push-ups, and I remember being very particular about people saying the word test, and so I'm sure I was definitely a contributing factor of like, oh, no exceptions, for you or for me. In terms of milestones, we had actually I think before that in the spring gotten to the point where more and more of our classmates were like, oh, something like this existed, I would pay for it. So we started getting more into the building phase, where we worked with a development team in India, one that you were connected to build out the product. We hired a designer to like make it look nice. And so that sort of was a big step. And then I think at some point in the summer, we didn't have the capability to accept payment, but the site was ready. And I think we got like the first 10 questions up. You couldn't even log in, I think. Like you couldn't create an account, you couldn't accept payment. But we just started putting that out, like, hey, there's these 10 questions. And one of the core innovations there was video explanations.
Yeah.
And which also we had a lot of debate over, if I remember. There was a lot of debate. None of this came easily. But we just put it out there and get people to use it. And they're like, this is great. And then, I think we got from 10 questions to like 20 to 50. Then we added the ability to create an account and save your progress. But we still couldn't accept payment. And I think payment didn't come until like September or something like that. We got like our first paying custer.
And was that PayPal? Because there was no Stripe back then.
There was no Stripe.
Folks would be surprised, younger folks at least, of like how hard these seemingly basic things now in web app development were, where it was like accepting payments was not trivial to do. Right? Like signups and all these things you kind of had to build from scratch.
I know. It's not now. You could just ask ChatGPT to build you an app and accept payments, and it would be done. But it was tough. And we also, we ended up focusing on a lot of things that we probably didn't need to. I think we thought about like how to accept payments in the US and in other countries early on. And it's just like, well, that's a later problem, but we didn't really appreciate it at the time. One thing I also remember was, Hansu and I were working like side by side every day. So we were learning together. And then you had your internship. And I think there was this question, which now I understand it better than I did then, of like, how do we keep you along the journey, knowing that you were going to come back and work with it? Because we didn't want to diverge so much where we're headed in a direction. You're like, what did you do to this company? Like, why are you doing these things? And obviously we would have like thought them out. But just like keeping, the founders sort of aligned and like having those debates periodically. I don't remember how we solved it. But I remember thinking like, oh yeah, this is challenging because Hansu and I are here like every day.
Right. Yeah. There's definitely a lot of coordination, even when you're working side by side with people, on getting on the same page. So there was definitely some newer challenges. I don't remember, any strife anymore, at least. So we somehow got through all that, and I think a lot of it too is like when you start seeing it working, you're like, yes, right. This is the right path.
Yeah, totally. Well, if we fast forward a little bit more, so we got our first paying customer in September. We're now in the second year of business school, and I think early on you made the decision that you weren't going to continue with Magoosh.
Yeah.
After business school. I think it'd be interesting for folks to hear about that.
Yeah. I mean, even though I came in with the idea of Magoosh and obviously was invested in it and trying to make it successful, I also had interest in just general tech and product management and working on like kind of innovative products and all that. So I always had that. It was always like the other thing that I was thinking about the whole time there. I had done an internship in tech, and kind of as we were approaching the kind of end of second year, it was like, okay, well, what am I going to do after? I knew I didn't want to go back to Deloitte. I definitely wanted to be in tech, and so I basically kind of maybe opposite of you, where it was like, for me, it was like, oh, let me just see what's out there and kind of like try different things. And then like, I'll make up my mind, and went through interviews, and then ended up getting a role at Microsoft that is kind of a cooler company now, but maybe wasn't like the coolest then, but was like an interesting role in search and new products. It was like tablets, like iPad had just launched, and so we were going to do like an iOS app and all this like voice search and all these like innovative things. And so I became enamored with that, and I was like, oh, I'm going to go do that. I know that Bhavin and Hansu are it's in good hands with them. So yeah, I made that call, but kept helping out even like after making that decision through the school year and into the summer, but then moved up after the school year. So I know that was a big decision, but I was grateful too that you all kept me involved going forward, and was able to stay plugged in.
Yeah. I remember being, I'd say, somewhat shocked when you said like, oh, I'm not going to keep doing this. I was like, oh, how do you already know this? Because it was, I think you had to make the decision kind of early in the second semester, whereas I was much more, I'm just going to keep doing this until whatever happens. Here we are 15 years later. But it also made a lot of sense. And, I think you had also shared earlier in your career, Hans had the most work experience, then I had some, and then you had less. And also Magoosh was entering a new phase where we realized, I think you had shared what I remember, I'm curious if this resonates, that like we kind of, yes, we need to continue improving the product, but we kind of knew what the product was. And the biggest challenge was like distribution and marketing.
Totally. And like I wanted to work on product, like be innovative, do weird people powered stuff. And that was kind of what I was into, maybe even more than, at least at the time, of like building a business. It was like, oh no, I just want to build cool things, was like the phase I was in at that point.
Yeah. And I think it's also interesting how you talk about you went to work in Microsoft, but before you'd always talk about how you were working on Bing specifically. Um, so yeah, your narrative is changed. I laugh because you're like, yeah, I mean, because Bing was like a startup within Microsoft, and there was, all of that, at least from what I remember. And I'm sure that, people still use it. And the last few times I've heard you talk about it,
I use the word
I haven't heard
now instead of Bing.
Yeah.
They've actually, they're on the radar again because they've been doing some GPT stuff. So I think even Bing is a little bit cooler than it was back then. I wouldn't put it way up there, but it's climbing. It's climbing.
It's funny because I don't think I ever had anything against Bing. We just gave you a hard time.
Oh yeah,
that was it, right? But yeah, they are doing some interesting things. And for me, it was just a continued path. I think I basically was just going to keep doing Magoosh until I couldn't Magoosh anymore. And I'd actually accepted my offer to go back to Deloitte as like the safety net because I had to make a decision early, and I was like, well, I don't know if I can continue Magoosh after I graduate, so like I'll accept. But I asked to push the start date out as late as possible. So I think folks typically start in like September after they graduate, and they let me push it out to at least like February, which gave me more time.
Okay.
And then we were able, to make more and more progress over the school year. And by the summer, we're generating some more meaningful revenue. I mean, not much and not able to pay ourselves much, but enough where I think, a little bit post-graduation, I was able to let Deloitte know, oh, actually, like I've been working on this company and it's had some success, and I'm deciding I don't want to return, which they were incredibly gracious about.
Yeah.
And I think, which I appreciated because it's not, I'm sure it's hard for companies to have someone accept and then decide not to attend, like not to join, but they totally understood. At least the person I spoke with and all my network there was like, oh, this is great. You're starting your own thing. Like, good luck.
That's awesome. So maybe talk through, I mean, this is 15 years of history, so it's a lot, but kind of highlights from there. I know we mostly want to talk about business school and kind of the early days of Magoosh, but maybe to bring it to the present date, how would you sum it up? Are some of the key milestones or big things?
How would I sum it up? It's been a roller coaster. That's never ending. Yeah, I mean, I'll say one thing that sort of materially changed for me over time was really deeply understanding the impact we could have in the mission. I think when I started it with you all, it was about like, oh, let's build this like consumer tech product.
Mm-hmm.
But now just seeing the impact we've served over, 500,000 paying students, many of whom, couldn't afford like a expensive $1,500 class. Many of whom, for whom the books just aren't sufficient enough and need additional support. And so I think that was one of the biggest things is realizing like, oh, we're having like really deep impact. And we would see it because as people would email us, we'd respond to every email. Because I remember during my sort of prep experience, I was frustrated because I was like, I don't understand why this book, like this answer in this book is this. I think it should be this. And I would Google around and try to figure it out. And other people say, I also don't understand it. It seems like it's wrong. And I was thinking, if we're going to build a company that's like supportive of students, we need to be able to stand behind our content and we need to answer the questions. And I think we all felt that way. And so I really enjoyed like answering student emails early on and seeing directly like the impact we were having. But yeah, doing the GMAT and expanding to the GRE, keeping things low cost, trying to, keep things very effective and serve like the audiovisual learning style and not even being too prescriptive on how someone should study is something, I realized that you could come into Magoosh and use it all sorts of different ways. You could like have a plan or you could not have a plan. And I think study the way you and I, it seems like wanted to say, which is go in, do questions. And when you don't understand something, kind of like work your way back to like what you don't understand. And so I think a lot of people have appreciated that versus like a firm structured approach, which, might not work for everyone. But then we made lots of mistakes along the way. We've tried new products that didn't work, or tried expanding into new exams with mixed success and all of that. But it's it's been nice, I will say, to always know that we're serving like the GRE, the GMAT, the aspiring MBA, the aspiring grad students in such high volume with so much success. And then also, I'll say that you've only been back for 3 months now, but we've been on the board this whole time, and obviously we've stayed in touch. But it's kind of amazing early on, I was the one bringing the new perspective to you, or me and Hansu were, and now you're coming in bringing a new perspective with your outside experience, your other startup experience, saying like, hey, there are different ways to do things, and honestly, it's very refreshing and a rewarding experience for me. So that definitely on a high right now.
Yeah, no, it's been a lot of fun, and quickly to zoom through what I was doing during this time. Was at Microsoft for a bit, but then left and went through kind of a full cycle of building a startup and having it acquired in the online yoga space. So it was an online yoga video streaming service called Allo Moves, and built that for 7 years. And in some ways has a lot of similarities to Magoosh. It's an instructional platform. We make videos, we pay to access the videos. It's much cheaper than in-person options. And it's all
you couldn't get away from it.
No.
I remember you tried to lead into product innovation, and I was like, look, you're just building a Magoosh for fitness.
I know.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. So yeah, and I think that's when I kind of matured as a entrepreneur and kind of embraced more just building something impactful, building a good business, building it the right way, versus that it has to just be some new fangled tech and all that. So yeah, built that. It was 7 years up here in Seattle, and then did a few other things since then, but kind of been searching for the next thing. And you and I were chatting, and basically started, we've had a couple of these chats over the years, but this time it like really lined up where I was ready to make a leap. And I also felt like Magoosh was ready for like a founder to come back, and that we're trying some new things. We got this big push right now into admissions and some exciting things happening there. So it just felt like the right time for me to come back. And I still haven't hung out with you in Berkeley since coming back, but I think once we do that, I think we have it planned in July. That'll be really something when we're out there together working on Magoosh back at the old stomping ground. So that'll be really fun.
We can go knock on the door of the apartment you used to live in to see if we can see the basement.
Yeah, we really need to.
Yeah, no, it's been a wild journey, and you said you've matured in the ways of like towards building a business, and I feel like there's so much I've learned and over the years in terms of understanding like the value of like mission and the value of distribution, and now is doing the things that I find interest, or like trying to understand that the things that I might not want to do, but that are good for like the business, can be interesting.
Right.
And so, yeah, it's a wild journey. And I think one thing I'll point out is, we've talked a few times about Hansu. He's, for those who don't know, he was one of our co-founders early on, who was the first like formal CEO of Magoosh in a sense, and ended up passing away due to non-smoker's lung cancer about 10 years ago at this point. But he was the most mature of us in terms of, being a leader and really, helped me grow in a lot of ways. And so, something to, I guess, keep in mind is we're both here 15 years out of business school, or, from the start of our business school journey, and have learned and grown a lot. And so for anyone out there who's thinking about like what it could look like in the future or what you don't know, there's a lot we didn't know. And there's a lot that we've learned in the last 15 years, and we've had a lot of people, including Hansu, help us a lot. And so it's always important to remember that.
Oh yeah, you can't be ready to go before the journey, as much as we want it that way or think we should be that way. it's like you're going to learn the lessons along the way and make mistakes but get better and you'll find your way and make it work with each step of maturity.
It's interesting. I don't know if I've ever told you this. There was a time where it's possible I told you, so I don't know. There was a time where we were thinking about like raising investment, and we were working with a firm, and there was like an associate or principal at the firm, not a partner, who was working with us and kind of like helping us with our pitch deck and like hoping that maybe we would be able to raise from their firm. And so, we ended up pitching them. I can't remember, they were interested, but like we didn't like the terms, and there's some other challenges. I don't remember all the specifics, but I do remember that this person like pulled Hansu aside at some point and said, like something to the effect of your co-founder. So he's talking about me, right? Is like going to hold you back. And kind of, and the reality is like, I didn't know what I was doing. So I think in the moment, as much as I like, really don't like that this person said that in the moment, but reflecting like there's some truth to, I wasn't ready, like you're saying, but also recognizing that you don't need to be ready. You can grow.
Yeah.
And to, Hansu's testament, I think I don't remember how he told me, but he told me in a way, which is he's like, I don't even want to take, their money. This is BS. You're like, I've seen you grow so much. I have so much confidence in you that like, just wanted to tell you this, not in a disparaging way at all, but more of just like, I believe in you. And it was just, really cool. Like it was a sad and experience in some ways, but also really cool when I reflect on it. And when I think about like growth mindset, I think about like that experience and
absolutely.
And recognizing, for others, like the same thing might happen, where there might be a time where, people don't think you have it, but that doesn't mean you never will.
Yeah, absolutely.
And since you mentioned we're making a big push towards admissions, it occurred to me, we should let folks know that Magoosh doesn't just help students with the GRE and GMAT. We also help students with the admissions process, learning how to make a list of schools, learning how to think about funding, learning how to write a personal statement, all of the things that I did not know how to do and could have benefited from. And so, you can bundle it with your GMAT and GRE prep, or you can just, if you're going to opt out of the GMAT or GRE, you can still get access to this information very reasonably priced, and gives you a lot of like great information.
Yeah. And we're back in the early days of building it, talking with customers, finding success and all. And I think it's great because it's exactly what we've been doing, but now kind of expanded to this kind of softer, harder to grok at times, path of like, what is all the things that you need to do? What are all the ways you prepare for each of those steps? So I think it's a great area to be working in, and excited to see how we build it out over time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you're playing a big part in it. So glad to have you, back and charging ahead with that. If you like what you hear and you want to hear more of us, or if you have questions, just shoot them in the comments. Reach out to us on the socials. I think that's what people say. I don't actually know what people say.
Let's go with that.
Sounds good.
All right. Good chatting.
Yeah, good chatting. Thanks for listening to Gradtalk MBA by Magoosh. If you enjoyed this episode, please like or subscribe this podcast wherever you're listening, and stay tuned for the next episode.